Good morning, everyone. Buenos dias a todos y a todas. Thank you all for joining us this morning, and welcome to the Inter-American Dialogue. Nearly 2 years ago, the government of Juan Manuel Santos in Colombia and the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, or the FARC, signed a historic peace accord, bringing an end to over half a century of armed conflict. The Colombian Congress later approved the deal. However, the accord had its share of detractors, most notably the former president and current Senator Álvaro Uribe, and in fact was rejected by a razor-thin margin in a national plebiscite the month before, in October of 2016. A critical facet of that accord was the creation of the Commission for the Clarification of Truth, Coexistence and Non-repetition that was agreed to by the government and the FARC. Despite doubts expressed by many, the Commission went forward and is going forward. It's made up of 11 commissioners, including its highly respected president, Father Francisco de Roux, who we are very honored to have with us today at the dialogue. The Commission's mandate will run for 3 years, during which time the Commission will focus on investigating and promoting the recognition of grave human rights violations during the conflict, as well as factors that contributed to its origins and persistence over 50 years. Testimonies will be gathered, will not be geared towards eventual presentation in justice in the Court of Justice, but rather focus on collective responsibilities. The Commission's central task is to investigate and produce a final report, a definitive accounting of the causes, consequences, and impact of the armed conflict, with a particular focus on its most fragile and vulnerable victims. Father de Roux and other commissioners face a daunting task. Colombia remains polarized around the issue of the peace accord, so the environment is quite politicized. Father de Roux has had to deal with fake news, fake videos that have sought to discredit him and the Commission's work. But no one has more integrity, credibility, and stature to lead this very delicate but absolutely fundamental initiative than Father de Roux, who has spent a lifetime navigating Colombia's complicated politics in relentless pursuit of peace and the protection of human rights. Pacho, as many of us know him, served as director of the Center for the Investigation and Popular Education called CINEP, and founded and directed the Program for Peace and Development in Magdalena Medio, a program that sought to promote coexistence and sustainable development in nearly 30 municipalities in Colombia. The program was awarded the National Peace Prize in 2001 and also helped give rise to other peace and development programs in the country. I can certainly attest to the fact that Father de Roux is absolutely tireless. I met him on a visit to Bogota when I was a program officer for the Ford Foundation in 1987. Father de Roux was then the director of CINEP. I called him up and I introduced myself and I asked him if we could meet. He said in his very gentle and polite way that his schedule was kind of full, but if I wanted, I could come and have breakfast with him at CINEP, that we could have breakfast together. So I said, great, that would be fantastic, and that's fine. I said, what time do you want me there? And he said, well, around, if you could be here by 5:30, that would be great. There was silence on the phone, and I arrived, and the good thing is there's not a lot of traffic at that time, so I was able to get there pretty quickly. If you want to avoid Bogota's traffic, just go at 4 o'clock in the morning. I arrived, and he was making pericos and tinto for me, and he said, "¿Qué hubo, Michael?" That was probably his third meeting of the day for him, but So every time, I keep thinking of him over the last 30 years, because every time somebody says to me, well, why don't we meet for an early breakfast, I think of Pacho and that experience. We're going to hear this morning from Pacho and his insights and remarks about the commission. We're also delighted to have with us Viviana Kristevich, the executive director of the Center for Justice and International Law, who has broad knowledge of the role of truth commissions, including in Argentina. And Vivi, thank you very much for joining us. And the discussion will be moderated by Michael Camilleri, who directs the Dialogue's Peter D. Bell Rule of Law program and has an enormous experience and expertise working on human rights. And Ben Gadan, welcome, Ben, a senior advisor to the Woodrow Wilson Center's Latin American program and the director of its Argentina project. The Dialogue is very delighted to partner with the Woodrow Wilson Center in this event. I want to also give special thanks to Cristina Spinel, who's there, who's from the Colombia Human Rights Committee, for her collaboration, her confianza in making this event possible, and also Tamar Zif for her hard work in coordinating this event. So thank you again to everybody for being here. And with that, let me turn it over to my colleague, Michael Camilleri. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. Welcome again, everyone. I think Dr. Shifter set that up pretty well. We're going to ask Father de Roux to set the scene for us a little bit, tell us about the Truth Commission, its mandate, its plans, what you've been up to these past few months as you prepare to formally launch, I think, on November 28th with this 3-year mandate. So we'll have you do that, and then we'll turn to Vivi for some comments, and Benjamin and I will moderate a discussion. So, Father de Roux, welcome, and thank you for volunteering to speak to us in English. Look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you for attending this dialogue. I'm very impressed with your presence here. I apologize for my Latin American English, but I will try my best to share with you. And thank you, Michael Shifter, for your introduction, and also for remember me our breakfast at 5:30 in the morning is at Cineb years ago. Thank you indeed. Yes, we are now in the middle of our work with the Truth Commission in Colombia, about to start the public work of the Commission in the 28th of this month. We have been preparing everything, talking to everybody in Colombia. We have had discussions and conversations with the military, the police, the armed forces, and basically with General Mejia, who is the head of the Colombian army. We have already a protocol for the way we are going to have the basic information, maintaining in confidentiality by the army. We also have conversation with the companies in Colombia, national companies and international companies in the country, because there were a lot of nervous preoccupation by the part of the industrialist people concerning our research for clarification of the truth in Colombia, especially people from Medellin, Cali, Apartado. We have been talking to them, and sort of trust is being growing with them. We have also discussed with the trade unions, I will say all the trade unions in the country, the Organization for Human Rights, every sort of organization of human rights. For instance, the women from the Rosa Blanca, who are the women who were abused when they were guerrillas in the FARC movement, and also people who are really against the guerrilla movement, but also people like Movise, who are the victims of the crimes of the state in Colombia. We have been discussing with the indigenous people, I will say all the indigenous organizations in the country, and we have started already the process of consulta, which is part of our constitutions, our constitution with the indigenous and the Afro-Colombians, in order they to participate in the process of looking for the truth. We have been discussing also and having dialogue with several universities in the country, the Javeriana, the National University, the Antioquia University, the El Valle University, because we expect a lot of contribution from the academic area in the country in searching for truth. This is to tell you that we are not expecting the 11 members of the Commission, to discover the truth of Colombia. We are inviting the Colombian people, they to create, they to contribute, they to face the real truth in our country. What happened to us? Why it was that we became involved in a terrible conflict with more than 8 million survivors, according to the Unidad de Víctimas, which are the formal recognized victims in our country. As you know, we have more than 82,000 disappeared people or missing people. It's the tax and the responsibility of the unity for searching for the missed people in Colombia. We conform a system with the Justicia Especial para la Paz, GEP in Spanish, and the unity for searching of the disappeared. And this is an advance, a path forward in terms of the Truth Commission in the world have been, because we have separated the judicial aspect of the clarification of the conflict, done now by the head. They have the responsibility of avoiding impunity after the conflict. But we are an extrajudicial organization looking for the human and historical truth of what happened to us. And this is quite important, but we work together all the time. In the last weeks, we went together to the Congress because we were facing difficulties. There was a project on law presented by the party of the president, demanding the Trust Commission, not to have access to the reserved information. And we managed together, working together to stop the law. And also, we have another difficulty because 14 new magistrates are being now appointed to the HEP, which is, in our opinion, something that is completely unconstitutional and against the pact done in La Habana. But this is just to say that we are working together. The HEP, the Commission for the Truth Commission, and the Unity for Searching the Disappeared, the missing people. But our challenge, as you can imagine, is how to work for truth in Colombia, and at the same time, how to work for reconciliation. In our opinion, if at the end of our effort, we are going to have a more divided country, that will be a big mistake of us. And so how to put together sincerity, transparency, courage to face the truth, and at the same time to generate respect for human dignity, and inviting everybody to build up together a country in real democracy. We have also to recognize victims everywhere in the country, and also to treat them as real citizens who have a lot of work to do. When they came to La Habana, because I accompany all of the group of victims coming to La Habana, what really impressed me was that when they arrived there, women and men and teenagers to La Habana, they were victims from the FARC, from the government, from the state, and from the paramilitaries. They were so courageous, facing their perpetrators. By that moment, the discussion in La Habana were about structural problems, and the situation was extremely difficult in the discussions, because the FARC people, they were expecting for real structural changes in the country because of the concentration of land, because of the inequality, because of the impunity, because of the political exclusion in the country. And it was very difficult to progress. Victims were very clever, in my opinion. They told to everybody, you are right, we have a lot of structural problems that are against our democracy. But the most important structural problems we have in Colombia are we ourselves. We, the people of Colombia, we are killing each other, we are hating each other, we are against the dignity of any Colombian, we are every day vulnerate our human dignity, we Colombians. And we have to change. This is the first structural problem we have to change in order to go after that, to face the other problems in a political and democratic way. Because of that, they called women from the government, and women from the FARC people. And they started facing the human problem. And this was the beginning, really, of the transformation of the Havana conversation. We have also to invite people to recognize their responsibilities. And this has to be a voluntary recognition, because we don't have power for, to condemn them or to pass judgment against them. And one of our challenges is to persuade what we call the terceros. People who were not fighting, but who were supporting the war and the conflict, that if they contribute to the peace process in Colombia and to the truth in Colombia, they are going to increase their legitimacy as companies, for instance, and also, in my opinion, to get to get recognition in the country. And finally, we have to work in a process of non-repetition, which is extremely difficult also. Reading the final results of the Truth Commission everywhere in the world, about 30 Truth Commissions. Usually they at the end of their documents, they list proposal for no repetition. But this is of no use at all. Nobody followed that finally. What we're trying to do is to produce a mobilization in the country during 3 years in order to try and get an agreement, with the industrialist people, the indigenous, the Colombian, African Colombians, the students, the military, the congressmen, the academic people, in order to produce together a small group of recommendations that really help us to go forward in the reconstruction of the country. So this is the basic points I would like to express just for starting the dialogue that I appreciate so much, Michael.
Terrific. Thank you so much. That was excellent. Viviana, let me turn to you, maybe just for some initial questions. You've obviously worked in Colombia for a long time, but also worked in many other countries in the region that have had transitional justice processes and truth commissions. So maybe you can put some thoughts on the table from your perspective, and then we'll dialogue.
Yeah, well, I think truth commissions and truth-telling processes are very important opportunities for understanding the legacy of violence, of exclusion and discrimination. They are critical for victims, and they are critical as well to reread the pillars or the social and political dynamics that allowed that violence and that exclusion to happen. So truth commissions are a way of looking at the past and looking at the situation in a more structural manner than justice processes. But also they are a way of narrowing the gap of lies for the future and creating a path for hope, a roadmap. And I think that if you look at several of the processes and how that has happened, not only in the moment when you had the Truth Commission process in the country, but also how it was used or what purpose it served later in the history of that specific country, you can see that Truth Commissions are not only about the results, but they're also about the process, about how you engage with different communities, how do you engage with victims, how do you engage with academics, how you decide what are the battles that you're going to fight in that Truth Commission, and what we're going to leave forward in terms of not a negotiated truth, because I think that one of the original sins of the Truth Commission in Colombia is that many think, well, here's a negotiated peace process that has many flaws. That's all negotiated processes. And we don't want a watered down truth. You don't want what we can agree on, but you want something that allows you to have a timeless document and also an engaging process. And this is, I think, a very important thing for thinking through how you're going to overcome the daunting task, as Michael Sr. was saying, that the Truth Commission has is, first of all, the sheer volume of violence in the country is 1 in every 5 Colombians has been affected by violence directly. And last Saturday, I was in Rio de Janeiro, meeting with some members of the Afro-descendant communities that have been touched by violence, and I was very shocked by what one of the mothers said of a kid that was killed by a bullet. She said, you know, the bullet that killed my kid went through me and went through my family and went through my community. So I think that when you have that level of violence, when you have 1/5 of the population that has been touched by violence, you have many more reverberations of that violence that have touched society as a whole. So facing that and creating a dialogue that is engaging enough, but also that is meaningful as a path forward, I think is very difficult in such a polarized political situation, and with a very fractured country, because I think one of the daunting tasks as well, or the additional complexities of the Colombian situation is that you want to create a narrative and a path forward in a country that has a democracy that has failed so many in the territories because of impunity, because Colombia is one of the most unequal countries in the world in terms of economic abilities, and it's also a very creative and beautiful country that has a long history of at least dreaming with a strong democracy and institutions, but a reality of very flawed and uneven levels of democratic inclusion of so many. And so how can a Truth Commission add to that process, and how the Truth Commission of a process of not only truth-telling but creating the type of Colombia that keeps the promises of the Constitution. You know, equality under the law would be like a major step forward in Colombia. Like true democracy and respect for everybody would be a major step forward. And I think that part of the path forward for the Commission is not only to think about the results, but the reverberations that can have in the future. I think the way in which the Commission can gain credibility and legitimacy by what they do and how they engage, the compassion, the empathy, but also the ability to say the truth and not to water down some of the difficult truths for the different political and social actors that have helped perpetrate cycles of violence and inequality is critical. And I see it from my experience in Argentina, my experience in Guatemala, in Peru, where you see that part of the value of the Truth Commission was not only the bestseller that came out of the Truth Commission in Argentina, you know, the Nunca Más was at the moment when in a country where people read a lot, a bestseller, but it shaped a generation. It shaped us. It shaped the generations that came. It permeated politics and the legal system. And so I think that is one of the main ways of surviving the test of time that the Commission could have. How can they narrow the scope of what they do, but also think how they engage and what are their main audiences, so that the legacy that they leave, as Father de Roux said, is not only in a piece of paper. It includes that piece of paper, but it goes way beyond that in terms of social processes and shaping a generation.
Thank you, Vivi. That was terrific. So we have a rich set of issues, I think, on the table. I'll maybe throw out a first question and then let Benjamin jump in. But you know, Michael Shifter mentioned the kind of complex political environment surrounding the peace accord, and the Truth Commission has not been immune from that context. The current president of Colombia was a critic of the peace agreement, but also very specifically of the Truth Commission when it was established and its membership, and talked about the ideological orientation, even proposed a kind of parallel Truth Commission. We know that one of the early challenges you faced is in requesting classified information from the Defense Ministry, and the Retired Officers Association took objection to that. You mentioned the legislative proposal that you had to sort of beat back in Congress. So maybe, Father Drew, maybe you could just speak a little bit about kind of the particular challenge of navigating that context, and how you think about achieving the kind of consensus you hope to achieve within that environment. And Vivi, maybe from your comparative perspective, you could offer some thoughts on whether this is a unique challenge in Colombia or whether there are things that can be gleaned from elsewhere that can provide some insight and some consejo maybe for Father de Roux and his team.
Yes, the situation for us is very complex, and the situation of the country is immense. And it is true that President Ivan Duque, before being president, at the beginning of the campaign, the political campaign, he wrote a document, an article in El Colombiano, criticizing the Truth Commission and telling about the possibility of creating a parallel commission. This is absolutely true. But once he gained the presidency, and 2 days after taking power, he came to visit us. And he came with the Vice President, Marta Lucía Ramírez, and the Foreign Minister. And we have a very good conversation for about 3 hours. It was the first time he was realizing who were we, because he was considering us to be left people against his government. And we were just explaining to him that they were a state institution. We are not the opposition. We are not against the government. We are not against the army. We are not against the companies. We are not against any political party. We are not against the FARC people. We are for truth. And we are inviting people to overcome mistrust and suspicions and things like that. And it is also that we had difficulties with the military. When we sent a letter to the Minister of Defense, the former Minister of Defense, asking for the sort of information we have the faculty to get, the letter was, how to say that, was taken by the ex-military group of ACORI in Colombia, which is they are very, very radical and also right-wing, opposer to the sort of work we are doing. And there was a big discussion, public discussion in Colombia. But we kept having conversation with the military and with the Minister of Defense, and finally with the present minister, Botero. We have already had the agreement, produced the agreement for having the possibility of having access to the information we need. And obviously, we are going to go through many discussions like that. The people from the ganaderos, how to say that, the ranchers of what's the name of the organization in Colombia? I don't remember. FEDEGAM. They said they told us we are going to create a parallel commission because we don't trust you. But what we are doing is inviting people to produce documents from their perspective, from their own perspective and rationality, to explain what happened to them during the conflict and how was the difficulties they got during the conflict, and how is it that they, for instance, people of the big companies in Colombia, how was it that they stayed in Colombia in the middle of the risks? How is it that they are contributing to the development of the country, and in order to confront different viewpoints, to contrast truth. But just looking for a comprehensive understanding of what happened to us as a whole in the society. I understand it's a problem of creating trust among us, and usually, when ending a conversation like this with the military or the companies or a sort of friendship originates. But I always tell them, remember Aristotle. Do you remember Aristotle? Amicus meus Plato, magis autem amica veritas. My friend is Plato, but my best friend is truth. And so always I tell them, okay, we are creating trust among us, but for us it's more important trust than the friendship with you. And I invite them to criticize us and to look together in discussion, the clarification of what we have to see in Colombia and to face in Colombia in order to transform our society.
Thank you. I think that the tensions that you see and that you're going through in Colombia have been faced by many of the commissions that have tried to build bridges so that different groups could participate of the building of this new narrative, and I think there are issues of trust and genuineness and openness, and I think your presence and the composition of the Truth Commission will probably open a lot of doors for that. But there are also things that are not about only a narrative, are about power, and the power that comes with a contended truth. So if you have a group that wants to keep on saying that, I don't know, that they didn't participate in disappearances or executions or kidnappings, those being some members of the FARC, some members of the military or others, there might be interests that go beyond our goodwill, and there will be very important limitations on the narratives that will be acceptable. And I think that keeping in mind that those bridges can be built within groups and institutions that are not completely hegemonic, that sometimes you can build the necessary trust and goodwill from parts of the institution so that you help the institution fulfill its mandate in legality and fairness is wonderful, but there will always be those tensions. And those tensions cannot be resolved with including like a minimum common denominator of what will be acceptable to all. Some things are hard to hear, but I think that part of the power of a Truth Commission comes with that, comes with leaving a legacy that is able beyond the tensions and what some in the FARC might want, some in some of the institutions that did wrong or did wrong would want just to be able to say, well, yes, in Argentina there were 30,000 and disappeared, and these are some of the dynamics and the actors that made this possible. So I don't know what to give you as a piece of advice, but to say that in all of these processes, goodwill and the possibility of changes of heart if they see a path forward that is a safe path forward, can actually help create some of the trust so that the information will flow and that it will help you build a better report and also a better agreement. And I think there are different ways of getting some of that information that are not necessarily, they do not depend on individuals, but also on institutional commitments. So that's what I think. I think that the relationship that this Truth Commission has with the government specifically and with the heads of the different institutions is critical as well.
Thank you. So I wanted to examine the international dimension for a minute of your work, and also how the international community has played a role, hopefully a constructive one, in previous examples that you've studied. And it gets back to a bit of this concern of the distance of the Colombian government from this process, or a lack of enthusiasm, if not opposition, as you referenced before the inauguration of President Duque. And so my question for you is whether there is any concern that some international actors would be less likely to engage if they didn't feel that the government itself was fully committed to this process. Whether there are other government actors, including in the United States, where the White House is quite close to President Duque, or even international civil society actors that would want to see a different context before they became a participant in the process. And then also turning to you, where you might give some insights into how the international community has played a useful role, either in pressuring actors to participate domestically, either in providing resources, insights. What is the role of the international community if it is, in fact, feeling welcome and constructive?
Thank you, Ben. In fact, we have a lot of support from the European Union, especially them. This is the reason I was in Paris, invited by Macron at the meeting in Paris last weekend. And also the United States organizations. They have been all the time supporting us. Even we started with the money of the international community for 7 months. We were working with that international fund. And we don't have the same support of the United States administration. But I have to say that yesterday, visiting the State Department and also people from the Congress and from the Camera, they were very supportive, and they really wanted to engage in helping us in what is going on in Colombia. I mentioned the administration because I'm afraid the idea they have, I mean, I don't know what they think about it. I don't understand it, but probably you do. But my impression is that they think more as a problem of drugs and terrorism than a process of transforming a society in a dynamic and democratic way, inviting everybody. But sorry, I'm not that sure my hypothesis is correct. But obviously, the United States has a great significance effect during the 50 years in Colombia, especially the international confrontation between the United States and the Soviet Union by the time the guerrillas were created in Colombia. Maybe I have to say something which is important. We have so many things. We have so many things to learn from other truth commissions everywhere, and especially from Argentina. But there is also a difference. You are coming from a dictatorship. We are trying to transform a country in a very complex violence, where victims became perpetrators and perpetrators became victims. You see the confusion? It's quite complex to clarify, to understand, to, in my opinion, sort of compassion we need in Colombia. compassion of our society as a whole. What happened to us as Colombians, and the way we get involved in such impressive crisis of us as people.
And I think that compassion will go a long way. And I fully understand the difficulties of doing that in the midst of a situation that is also very complex and, and challenging. And I think one way of overcoming that dichotomy of victim and perpetrator as if they were individual, like bad man and good man, and is also understanding that there's a context, that there are processes that made a lot of people do a lot of bad things, and being different of the suffering and benefit from the suffering of others, and that was not a linear thing, that sometimes people went and from one end of the spectrum to the other one. And we've seen it in many of the cases that we've litigated. We've seen it with, young kids that were forcibly recruited and participated of the FARC, and then at the paramilitaries, and then it's like these cycles of being in one or other aspect of end of violence. So I think that that's why it's so important also to take a step back and recognize the social, economic, and political processes in a way in which is not shaped by the words of others or some technical concepts that are impossible to understand for the people that are going to be receiving the text, or that it will alienate half of the population because they will think, if you say the word reproduction of inequality, that means the FARC or whatever, or means. So it has to be a way of understanding those processes in a way that builds a narrative that can be engaging for many. I think the international processes had an impact in what happened in Colombia, and the international community and specific governments as well have the opportunity of supporting right now the process and the Truth Commission specifically in very practical ways. I think one practical way is declassification of documents, which has been something that has been done in for several Truth Commissions, and it has helped create some harder documentation about events and also networks and better understanding some of the illegal actions of some of the actors. I think economic support is one that is very clear, and I think there are many institutions that can do that. And I think beyond the role of specific countries, I think there's also a role for international institutions, for what the UN can do to support it, what the OAS can do to support it because of the documentation that they have. For example, for Argentina, we asked the Inter-American Commission at one point to basically declassify part of the information that they had on the disappearances and violence in Argentina during the 70s. And so they went through their archives and gave things to the to some of the processes in Argentina, not at the time of the Truth Commission, but later. But for some of the memory processes in Argentina, there are some things that civil society has been documenting for years as well. So I think there's a very vibrant community here of in this country and in other countries that has been following Colombia, documenting processes in Colombia. I think there's a strong community working on issues of women's rights, on the differentiated impact on Afro-descendants, people that have worked on internally displaced, on issues of arms and violence. So there's a lot of knowledge outside as well that could be furnished and shared, and data and documents that have been collected over time. So I think that can also be a contribution. And of course, I think there are lots of stories, and you're engaged in that, of Colombians that had to flee the country, that were forced to flee. Some of them sought refuge, some of them sought other ways of finding a safe space where to continue their lives, but there's also the possibility of the international community helping create those bridges. And I thank Cristina for her help on that specific and work, and also on the incredible work that they've been doing over the years for documenting and helping gather information outside the country as well.
I wanted to return to the no repetition aspect of this work, and also, again, the precedents that have been set. I wonder, your observation, I think, unfortunately, is one that's probably widely shared, which is that the impact of the reports has been profound in many cases, but the impact of recommendations and the series of proposals has been less so. You described briefly a different approach, perhaps a narrower set of recommendations, it sounded like, or one with more and diverse buy-in from various elements of society. But I wonder sort of whether it will be, in your view, even outside the scope of your work, to continue to see toward implementation of some of those recommendations, or whether you think there may be progress in implementing them even during the 3-year period that you are conducting your review, so as to have some even greater ownership over the aspects of no repetition. And then I'd love for you to just challenge that observation that, in fact, the recommendations themselves have not been played the starring role, unfortunately, in many of these processes that maybe they could have or should have.
You know, we try to put together the searching for the clarification of what happened to us with the non-repetition process, thinking on the future all the time. And because of that, okay, we're trying to take into account the amount of data we have in Colombia using big data machines in order to put in relationship the information from the unity of victims in Colombia, more than 8 million data of information, personal informations, all the documents produced by the Centro de Memoria Histórica, which are extremely important, all the data of the unity for land in Colombia, what happened to the small farmers, and especially the campesinos, losing their control over the land, and also, obviously, the information coming from the Fiscalia and the military. We're getting all of that together, you know, and also we have started working in the deep Colombian countryside. We are creating Casas de la Verdad. Now we have 10 Casas de la Verdad in different places in the country, and we are about to have about 29 of them, and doing a lot of work with the Colombians who are now in several countries away, because of about 500,000 Colombians left the country because of the conflict, and we're trying to get in contact with them to organize them everywhere. Last week there was a big meeting in Barcelona. We had already another one in Stockholm, in London, in Paris, here in the United States, in Canada, with the idea of resembling everybody, and at the same time discussing really what happened to us, and what are we going to go to do in the future. I hope, obviously, when you do that, and when because of the mandate, we have to clarify the relationship between the economy and the conflict. the politicians and the conflict, the paramilitaries and the conflict, the drug trafficking and the conflict is part of our mandate. The institutional responsibilities, the government responsibilities, this is part of our mandate. We have to clarify in these directions, which is obviously going into the structural problems. And when we try to invite people in Colombia to face the truth and to discuss the real problems, I'm sure we are going to have a lot of mobilization and discussions, but this is the only way of understanding why the amount of violence we get in Colombia come from, and how we see that we started finally excluding each other and hating each other and thinking that killing among us was the solution. That did give you an idea of the challenge we are facing. And but with this amazing is when you listen to the person telling you what happened to him or to her. I was thinking in the reference you made to the lady talking about his son or his daughter, or her daughter. I remember a campesina one day near Ituango. You come from Ituango. Telling me one day, because I was talking to her. I was talking to her in her rancho. She was alone. And suddenly he said, "Did you notice the small room near the rancho we had there?" Yes, there was a small room there. And she said, "You know, my children was there when he was 12 years old. And suddenly, I heard an explosion. And I went out the rancho. And I saw the flames because of the explosion. And I started thinking of my children. It was so hot that it takes time for me to enter the small room. And when I entered there, my children was there. But he was spread in the walls. And I brought Platon, how you say that, and I started recovering my children from the walls, putting him into the Platon. And after telling me this, she asked me, "Please tell me the truth." Can you imagine? She was telling me everything. "Please tell me the truth. Who were they? Who left this grenade in front of my house? Why they decided to attack us? We were simple campesinos. Who ordered them to come here? What were the purposes?" You know, this is the sort of truth victims want to know. And they feel they have the right, the state, to tell them the truth, the state, in order to be a credible response.
I think that those stories are the ones that fill you with empathy and the ability to say, well, this is what the never again. This is the never again. And so when I think about, your question about the recommendations and the processes and what you leave behind, I think deciding how you're going to make sure that you have enough goodwill and you have the possibility of some people hearing some of these stories and learning what we want them to learn from those stories. Not hate, not revenge, but compassion and empathy for the dignity of all. Is going to be part of the critical part of the process. I think that the recommendations itself are important. Sometimes they are important. They're not the most important thing in terms of the short-term processes, but they can be the elements that are going to be taken by civil society, by human rights organizations, by mayors and presidents or members of the judiciary to move forward. I see it every day with, I don't know, international conventions or things that the Inter-American Commission does or some of the other reports. Their power is not in what they say. Their power is in how people are able to take them and use them in social and political processes in the future. When in 94, a group of states of the Americas adopted the Convention of Belém do Pará, it was just a piece of paper, but it turned into like 20 laws on violence against women, and it created like a whole discussion about the issue. And so those recommendations will be powerful if they're linked to the institutional and the social processes that make it powerful. But they can be powerful. I mean, we've seen it with the Truth Commission of Peru. And I think it's not only the recommendations, it's what other things can you leave? Like, for example, have you thought about how can you ensure that reverberation? Like, will there be spaces of memory? Will those casas de la memoria stay for the future to keep a process of dialogue? For Peru, for example, that has been important, has been contentious, but it has been important. Not to say for Germany or for Israel or for so many other processes. You know, we remember and we have those spaces so yes, I do believe that they do matter.
Terrific. Thank you both. I have a lot of questions, but I think at this point we should open it up to you all. So we'll take maybe a question from each side of the room. We'll start right here. We'll take 3 questions and come back to our speakers.
Okay. Thank you. I'm Luis Alberto Salgado. I'm from Peru, human rights lawyer. How do you confront the issue that many people do not want to know the truth? In fact, they hate the truth because they have committed serious crimes against humanity, either from the state or from particular subversive groups. I was in Colombia last year, about 3 weeks, and I had a conversation with John Arnault, who's the head of mission, and Raúl Rosente, the chief of staff. And I was wondering, at some point, you have to deal with that. So all the truth commissions, I know also Salomon Leonard Febres, he's my friend, I spoke a lot with him, and Monsignor Bambarén also, who told me their experiences. So I was wondering how, at some point, how do you deal in the practicing every day with that? Because they don't show propósito de enmienda, ni dolor de corazón, ni arrepentimiento. And very often they are linked with a lot of power in the press, in the judiciary, the executive, and in the armed forces itself. So I would like to know how you deal with that. And my praise to you, and I know the risks that you run every day, and the commissioners as well, as it was in Peru, as it is in Argentina, and Chile, and everywhere. Thank you.
First, thank you very much for what you're doing. As a Colombian, you're building country. We're building our country. That's exceedingly valuable. So, my heartfelt thanks for your challenge ahead, which we all know it's very, very tough. My question is very simple. We're missing some actors here in this picture. So drug trafficking is a huge fuel to this. We tend to speak of paramilitaries and drug traffickers as if they were sort of separated. Maybe they have much more connections than being too independent. And how do we deal with the fact that it's not symmetric, meaning when victims were speaking with their perpetrators in Cuba, the victims of the FARC could see the face of people that for 20 or 30 or 40 years were leading the FARC. But then the victims of the crime of state had in front of them un funcionario that took that job 1 year ago and 2 years from now will be out of it, who his heart is with the victim. He has absolutely nothing to do with the crime. So it's totally asymmetric in the sense that if we're chasing the state, are we chasing nobody and placing the guilt on everybody? Or should we focus on the individuals that were unfaithful to the state? Or should we be concerned on strengthening the state to be able to prosecute state actors that were unfaithful to the state?
Pamina Furshow from George Mason University. Thank you so much for coming. And for speaking in English. It's very impressive. I had a question about, you told this very tragic story about this campesina woman and her child. And that's very much reflected that need to know not necessarily the circumstances of what happened or, you know, who killed, but why and who ordered it. And the broader question of why is so important to people. I work with communities that have been tremendously affected by the war. And it's just a resonating question. And so my question is, my first question, I have many. How is the government working with you? I understand that you've had a lot of difficulty accessing the military archives. How are you going to proceed with investigating and looking into these broader questions of why, and are you being provided access? And then also a smaller second question. I'm really curious if you can tell us a little bit more about the activities of these Casas de Verdad. And what they will be doing in the regions. I understand you said there will be 29, and there's already 10. What is the goal of these casas?
Let me start with you in the Casa de la Verdad, the House of Truth, or the House to Truth. The first thing we are doing, we're talking with the victims, listen to the victims, and trying to get the experience of their suffering as the first way of entering the clarification of what happened to us, and trying to talk in the deep Colombian countryside, what happened to, I would say, the most abandoned communities there. But we have also in the Casa de la Verdad, people having psychosocial preparation in order not to re-victimize the people who are encountering us. And also people helping us in questions of security for those who approach our houses. We have also a program of pedagogy, you know, to help them to understand what we're trying to do and what does it mean, looking for clarifying the situation and looking for no repetition processes. And we have a process of communication, inviting the media to join us. We consider this to be very important from the regional areas and then in a national perspective, because it is usually the journalists and the TV people who produce the history of a commission of truth. But always with probably two basic ideas: the victims first and the human dignity always being protected. You are right about the sort of immense difference between talking to the guerrillas, who are the direct responsibles for what happened during 50 years of war, government people who come every 4 years and they are changed. But we are trying to, and this is probably, this is also for you, Luis. What we try to do is to try and produce patterns in order to understand in different times and in different areas of the country what happened in a specific developments of the war and in a specific developments of the victimization of people. When I say patterns, I'm referring to cultural aspects, economical aspects, political aspects, and also subjects participating in them and institutions. Because if you have a pattern, you have the possibility of understanding the whole movement that was producing and repeating and transforming to repeat more and more massacres. Or, for instance, what is the pattern who is behind 15 children or 17 teenagers taken to war? What is the pattern there? 17 children taken to war. I mean, what is the pattern we have in more than 4,000 falsos positivos in Colombia? Why? Why our army? Finally, what is the pattern behind falsos positivos? I mean, okay. Only individual people, that's the question. Only individuals, people? Or there was a question of the institution itself? And politicians also. And cultural aspects. I mean, okay, what I try to say. And finally, no, Luis, you are right. Is obviously, many people don't want to say the truth. They are against the truth. They oppose telling the truth. In a very personal way, I try to listen to them. for hours to try to understand the rationality. And usually you feel the insecurity, also the indignation, the suffering they have down there, the properties they are protecting, the interest. And but it is absolutely important to start listening to them, and to and also to accept that they have to be respected before they being able to understand anything you have to discuss with them, and especially trying to invite to their conscious to think about consistency with them as human beings and the sort of problem they have created in the society as a whole, and the victimization they have also participated in. But it's an enormous problem. You are obviously you are right.
Thank you. We're just about out of time, but I want to give Viviana the last word if you wanted to offer any remarks on those questions or anything else.
I would say is that I always see like the path forward with the new generations. So if there's something that I think is very important for the Commission as well, dealing with victims and perpetrators and how it affected societies, how will you be a process that is relevant for youth and for those that will be building the new Colombian, along with all of us that are older, but that is also sometimes a big challenge because different generations deal with that differently. So, and we all wish you the very best. You are such an incredible and inspiring person. I think I can say that we all feel very touched by your words and by your commitment, and that you count with our support, with the limitations that we all have, but that we value enormously the task that you have ahead, and that we wish you the very best of lucks for your sake and the sake of the Commission, but moreover for the people of Colombia.
And let me just echo that and thank you, Father de Roux, for being here. It's a monumental task that you have ahead of you, but a really crucial one, and we know you're the right person for the job. So we wish you the best of luck, and we will support in whatever way we can from here. I want to thank you all for being here. Thank Viviana, thank Benjamin and the Wilson Center for partnering with us on this event, and please just join me in thanking our panelists.